Hi everybody, it's Colin Stevenson here, joined by my hero John Lenhart. Hi John.
Hi.
Now, John, we spoke in the last video about your modelling, about your project modelling, and about having to be able to replicate that through different companies. Through anywhere that you went, you had a model. Now, you went to Procter and Gamble because Dow wasn't fast enough to put in an offer. You went with the bigger company. You went in and you were able to have all this knowledge through them because you were able to go around at different times and interview people. Now, what happened was Dow came back round at some point, didn't they? And you had all this information from a larger company to take into a smaller company. Now, I imagine this would have been some sort of synchronicity that was meant to happen.
Right. So what happened was I actually contacted them. Working at Procter & Gamble was kind of like getting my MBA, and it was great, but I didn't want to stay in MBA school for the rest of my life. Yeah. And there were books written. There was a big book called Soap Opera written about what was actually going on there, and that's a whole nother story. Remember, I'm explaining why I know what I know and why no one else knows it as it relates to helping people psychologically. So the thing is what we learned at Procter & Gamble is I was a liquid formulation person with a very complicated formula. A formula had over 30 ingredients, which means it was over 30 dimensions. And it taught me how metrics, what are you measuring, how are you measuring it, which I'm going to end up using in psychology all the time when I ask people. But what happened was when I left there and went to Dow had always wanted me. I had always wanted to go there. I had this expertise, and I could always go from P&G to Dow. I could never go from Dow to P&G. So if you remember, when I was at P&G, they gave me the Myers-Briggs test, and I came out INTJ, the architect, or it's also called the mastermind. And I definitely was an architect or a mastermind at Procter & Gamble. Well, at Dow, I took the Myers-Briggs, and I came out INTP, the logician. And what I want to show you is I was the logician at Dow. Remember, I'm an administrator teacher, but in this chemical company, this is how I acted. So the first thing about the logician is they're curious. Mm-hmm. I started off in the research assignments program. I worked in paper latex for 3 months. Then I went to North Haven, Connecticut, worked in urethanes for 3 months. Then I had these different jobs and I was curious. I went to different locations. So I was very curious. And what happened was during one of my jobs, curious me, walking around in this central research type of building, and they had several buildings. It wasn't just one building in central research. I ran into a guy who showed me that he could take a paintbrush that had been used in an oil-based paint. So if you imagine taking a paintbrush, like let's say this, this wide, and he painted and then he let it harden. So you have an oil-based paintbrush that hardened. And then he had this goopy mixture that he put in a Ziploc bag. He'd put the paintbrush in it, tie a rubber band around the bag. He'd knead this stuff into the paintbrush, take it out, run it underwater. It'd be clean. You could even take a flame underneath it and it wouldn't light it because there were no solvents being used to do that. This combination of ingredients could take a paintbrush that you could pound nails with. I could take that paintbrush and pound a nail that is that hard, and I could bring it back. This mixture was infinitely soluble in oil and infinitely soluble in water. So I'm going to have to teach some technical things, but I want to make this point. I was walking around the Central Research Laboratories, curious me, talking to people, and what did you invent? What did you invent? These guys were inventing all these different things. If it didn't cure cancer or AIDS, they thought it was a waste of money. Huh. Yes. Everybody there was like, but it doesn't cure cancer and AIDS. All it does is bring a paintbrush back to zero. All it does is it's infinitely soluble in oil and water. I just came from Procter & Gamble where they're like making billions of dollars of money over cleaning and doing stuff other than cancer and AIDS. Yeah. So now I'm like, this is a pretty good situation. So I am going to have to get a little technical. So I want to explain some things. A surfactant That word surfactant means surface active agent. And it works at a surface. Oil and water don't mix. We all know that. A surfactant, you can think of it as something that has a head and a tail. The head loves water. The tail loves oil. So the head, basically what happens is the tail goes in the oil. So if you imagine an oil droplet, all these tails are in the oil. And now the water sees the water head and it's okay with the oil.
Yep.
That's what soap is. You get something oily on your hands, you can't put it under water. If you take soap, the oil tails go in, the water heads stick out, you put water, it pulls the oil off your skin and it takes it into the water. That's what a surface active agent or a surfactant does. So that's what this is. Now, I was formulating these surfactants in liquids, and when these surfactants interact with each other, they could take each other out. You know, they could glom on and fall apart. And there's all these different phases. We're going to talk about that in a later project, but these surfactants do different things. Okay. When my first summer at Dow, when I helped with that project, they had viscoelastic surfactants. So these surfactants all arrange a certain way. And if you took a jar of these surfactants in water and you did this and swirled the jar around and set it down, it would swirl around. And when it stopped swirling, it would go backwards a quarter turn. So the surfactants would all go back. They were shear thinning. The surfactants set up a certain way. And when pressure was put on them, they moved. And then when the pressure was stopped, they moved back. That's elastic. When people say they're resilient, and I ask them the definition of resilient, they actually define the word elastic. I'm able to bounce back from a shearing event.
Yeah.
That's why I just laugh at everybody on the internet who defines resiliency the wrong way, because they're all defining it the wrong way. The only way to demonstrate resiliency is to get sheared. I don't believe that. That's elasticity. So people are not defining it. Resiliency is your ability to get yourself to 80 and stay there despite the shearing.
Yep.
So when people go, we're resilient, we bounce back, you were elastic. So that's what I was doing, is I was working with these surfactants. Now, what this guy had was a polymeric surfactant. So if you imagine surfactants being individual ingredients like this, a polymeric surfactant is a long molecule that the top half, if you will, likes oil and the bottom half likes water. So one of these could bridge the gap where it would take a bunch of these little surfactants.
Yep.
Onto that surfactant, they had grafted these chains that liked oil, and they needed to formulate the normal surfactants to bond with the chain. So if you think about it, this thing was like a gun. Like this polymeric surfactant that was grafted held these normal surfactants as bullets. And what happened was when they were put in water, the thing turned into a circle and kept everything safe, and it could do it infinitely. And then as soon as you put it in oil, it would flip outwards and it could be in that infinitely. This was mind-blowing technology that I basically found. And the guy that I was talking to, the PhD, wasn't even the guy who invented it. There was another guy who invented it. This guy, his name was Dale Pickleman. He was in his 50s. He didn't have a PhD. And he was like, I'm going to say like the 12th most senior person in Dow Chemical. So this is a guy who started off washing the test tubes, and he just worked his way up before they required PhDs. And now he's this old guy who's got these wacky ideas, and another PhD kind of glommed onto it. And when I found out who invented it, it was Dale Pickleman. So I'm not a PhD. This guy's not a PhD. And we're buddies hanging out.
Yeah.
So now what's happening is we're realizing there's all these applications that could happen from this. And just because I was curious. So what I did was I did over 1,600 designed experiments to study everything about all these interactions. And I was learning things nobody in the world was learning about with surfactants. because I had all these experiments and was finding out all these things. And now all of a sudden I understood more than anybody, because I had a case where I could make something infinitely soluble in oil, infinitely soluble in water, and I could see the difference. I was playing on the entire playing field. No one else was.
So when you were using your model to understand these, these 1,600 different, tests, etc., that you were doing, you're not only looking at the results though, you're looking at the process, you're looking at how you were putting them together on purpose. Again, so there was a lot more to it than just adding and subtracting chemicals, I imagine.
So I understood, you're exactly right. So I understood exactly the process that was going on. So I was explaining to people, here's what's happening, because no one could explain. Again, it's like the model for the mind and the brain. No one, we could see this effect happening and no one could explain it. But because I did these 1,600 designed experiments, which in them all did these different variables, I understood exactly what was going on. And so I gave a presentation. Now you got to remember, I was 26 at this time, not a PhD, presenting to a room full of PhDs, and all these guys were older. And I presented this, and one guy stood up in the meeting and said, "You're wrong. That can't be right." And I said, "Why?" And he said in front of everybody, "You're not old enough to know the right answer." And I said, you know me, improv guy, I said, "So if I took some spray paint and sprayed my hair white, would it improve your hearing?"
Nice.
It got ugly. But the reality was I'm not going to back down from a fight, and I'm used to a bunch of PhDs. I told you at Procter & Gamble that happened. These PhDs marched me in the office and said, "Tell him what you said, he's wrong." So, 6, 7 years later, they end up telling the world and taking credit for it, but it's saying I'm right. This guy said it right in the middle of the meeting in front of everybody. There's no way my model could be right because I wasn't old enough.
That's mega. So, I mean, we're going to go back, but just go forward 25 years. And what you're doing just now is the exact same as what you did back then, because the model works. Now, from the model that you were using with all these chemicals and what you're doing now with the mind and brain, there's no change because you know it's guaranteed to work. Now, you have tested, same again as the gentleman that stood up, you're still testing people and they're saying, "No, you're wrong. It's because of this, it's because of this," but they can't tell you why you're wrong because you're not wrong. So sorry, we'll go back. Now, when you use your improv, and obviously you went to this, how did the other PhDs feel when this kind of started going head to head?
So what happened was they moved me out of central research. Okay. And one of the reasons why was they had this company, Dow Brands, that was a consumer products company. And the rationalization was, "John, it's better for you to go work in that company and pull on the technology than sit here in central research and push on it." And remember, the reason is I don't have a PhD. Just like, well, you don't have a psychology degree, you can't know this. Okay. So what happened was I go to Dow Brands, and all these executives inside the company, these rich, and I'll say it, white guys, they all were sending me their golf shirts because they all had some stain on it like their favorite golf shirt. And they heard, "Hey, there's a guy in Dow Brands that can get any stain out of anything." And so I would come to my lab and do my work, but I'd have a stack of these like golf shirts and khaki pants and different stuff that had these stains on it that I would formulate a little different version of it and put it on there and get it clean and send it back. And I didn't make any money from it, but I had a side business because everybody knew, yeah, that guy can get any stain out of anything. So what I started doing, the second part of being an INTP, is being logical.
Yep.
Okay. So what I did was they said, "Hey, can you formulate this into a stick?" We had this thing called stain stick. "Can you make this into a stain stick?" And so what happened was I had a logical approach to formulation. Again, I'd already formulated at Procter & Gamble. I was using all my models and I had a way to formulate. And it's a huge backward step, which is everything I do with psychology too. So normally, here's how this works. Let's say you have eight ingredients.
Yeah.
You put the 8 ingredients in there, you try something and it doesn't work. Let's say it falls apart, the stability is bad. Then you try it a little different and this happens. Then you try this. So you formulate like 100 versions, and there's 100 versions sitting on your lab bench. And then the managers come in and say, well, how's it going? And they go, look at the 100 I've done. They're going, good job, keep going. Because the next formula might be it. They'd show up at my lab and go, what have you done? And I'm like, first 2 months of the project, I haven't made a product yet. I'm backward stepping. And they'd get mad. Like, we're far away. I go, when's the deadline? Deadline is in 4 months. You know, you had 4 months to do this. You're 2 months into, you haven't made one product yet. And I used to illustrate it this way. If you have 8 ingredients in a product and you're going to try, you know, 8 or 10 levels. So every ingredient at 8 or 10 levels. I mean, it's more than that, but how many different formulas would you have to make to cover all that area? It's the same number as winning the lottery. So what I used to say to these managers is, every time that guy makes a finished product as a first step, he thinks he's going to win the lottery. Do you think he's going to win the lottery? Oh, he's got 100 tickets, so now he's definitely going to win the lottery. What's the odds of the lottery? Like 170 million to 1? Like, you're asking me to find the 170 million to 1 answer by just buying a lot of tickets?
Yep.
I'm gonna backward step this. So I had this whole process. When I formulated, my first step was performance. I need to get the performance that they're saying. I don't care what the product, I don't care anything about the product. If it's got to clean this soil out of this, you know, a surface, then until I can do that, I don't have a product.
Yep.
And so I'm not even putting the whole product together. I'm just putting the engine of that product together to see if I can get the performance. Once I had the performance, then I deal with the aesthetics. Aesthetics is a big part of this, and I'll show you this in later jobs. Is, well, we already saw it. You know, if the smell isn't right or if the thickness is wrong, they don't believe it, even though it works. Even though performance is there, for humans, the aesthetics have to work. So the dyes, the thickness, the fragrance. If I put the fragrance on top of this and the fragrance smells horrible, that's the next touchiest thing. So once I get the performance and the aesthetics right, now I have to get the stability right. I can make a product, but if someone buys it during the winter and their studies have been done, they come home and what they do is they pull it in the garage, they get all their food into the house because they don't want any of that to spoil. And then what happens is the next day they go in and they get their detergent out of the car, or their cleaning products out of the car, or they shove them underneath their sink. And the average temperature underneath the sink is 55 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yep.
If your product got frozen in the car on the way home, could you put it underneath the sink? Could you put it at 55 degrees and it come back together without you having to shake it? There's all these stability requirements. I can make the greatest product in the world, but it might not be stable. It might not be stable if it experiences different temperatures in shipping or when you buy it. So next I have to do the stability. And then the last thing I worry about is cost. There's a lot of ways to get that product under the cost after you have everything together. So I'm doing backward steps. I'm not trying to make a product. I'm trying to make something that performs, and I'm trying to do this. And boom, when it was due, I had it done. What did the other guy have? He had 450 samples that he was one away from and didn't get his project done.
Yeah.
So to me, this is so logical. Like I can't, like you're asking somebody to win the lottery to just make a formula, but management just wanted to see. They're working. They have a lot. They got a lot of stuff. They're just this far away. They're light years away.
Yep. And you spoke about this in your last video that we did regarding your project management model. It's just, that's your, even though it might not be the massive project for the company, it's your project. So it doesn't matter if it's yours, you can replicate it onto other people with theirs as well. So it shows you, like, obviously, the way that you've brought things forward is a way where it's truth. So you're at 10, whenever you do something, it's the truth. The backward step is there. That's the questions being asked. You're not jumping in and saying, well, I'm almost there and push, 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 because you're going pushing yourself further away from where it is that you should be.
And you get more desperate and you can't think as well. So what happened was, the reason why I got so many projects done, or so many design experiments done, is they started saying to me, we want you to be more productive. And I said, well, give me a technician. They're like, you're too young, and we're not going to have somebody work for you here. And I'm like, okay, then this is all this. I'm doing everything I can. They finally got me a guy. This guy was the number 5 seniority in the entire company. So you think there's like what, 70,000 or, whatever, how many thousands of people that worked at Dow. This guy was the 5th longest tenured person. He didn't want to work for anybody, is what they said. And his name was Warner Jensen. And he had a crew cut, old guy, like everybody thought was an old curmudgeon guy. Now, I grew up in Southern California. We had more than 3 TV stations, and we had TV stations that used to show old TV. Yep. And I grew up loving old TV. So one of the examples I'll give you is when we lived in Southern California and we went trick-or-treating, I would dress up as Groucho Marx. Yeah. So I was a huge Groucho Marx fan. But the thing is my grandparents lived there. We would go around our neighborhood, and then we'd go around my grandparents' neighborhood with all these old people. And a little kid dressed up as Groucho Marx going around to old people. They gave us so much candy. We used to wait. We used to stand on the scale with our candy and then take it off. Like, I think like one year, one of me, my brother, sister, we had 22 pounds. One of us had 22 pounds of candy. Wow. It was just, I got my brother, I'm like, look what I'm doing. For 2 years, he dressed up as Harpo Marx. But it's like, this is a gold mine. But I used to watch all these old, TV shows, old movies. This guy knew all of that stuff. So what happened was, there's this young kid and this old guy, and they're doing bits from all these old TV shows. We used to always go, hey, nothing up the sleeve, nothing between the ears. Let's work today, and we just start laughing. And so this guy and he was so productive. He had so much fun. He was one of the greatest people I ever worked with. And we got a lot done. He got a lot done. We had a lot of fun, every day. And everybody was just shocked. Like, everybody thinks this guy, doesn't want to work and is a curmudgeon, and he's working with John. And again, that's that leadership thing. It's like bringing out his uniqueness. So the final thing I'll tell you about my personal life is I was doing all these sports, and the only video of me playing basketball was at this time. I was on a team. I was basically, doing touch passes, doing all these wild things. I was having the time of my life playing, basketball and volleyball, but I also coached. So I got my Henry Andrews out of me. I was coaching football teams. I finally got to be a coach. And then the town, like I said, had all this money and all these PhDs. They had their own cable access. And I started doing announcing. I used to do the color commentary for the football games, the high school football games, the hockey games, the basketball games. I was on television in this town. It was kind of like, yeah, this is just a great time. I was just out there, doing all the stuff and creating all these things and having the best time.
So I just want to clarify something, right? Because when you were talking about, coming in the old guy, the crew cut, Groucho Marx, all this. So your experience with older people growing up were good experiences, and you were understanding the value of their knowledge. You were understanding the value of the interactions making you laugh. And this is why you were always able to obviously interact through this time with Dow. Now, if I can think back, I was always that way in terms of elderly people myself. And I don't mean elderly as in really old, I just mean adults in general. I always had that. So you've obviously worked out his intangible driver before looking at him as what he was, which is an old crew cut white man that was grumpy. You just looked at his intangible driver, thought back of what made you happy, what made the old person happy within the TV program, and then just put that in, and that just kind of brought you together to create magic in a sense.
Oh, we were always laughing. People would be like, why is that lab always laughing? And we were like, we were having the best time in the world. They gave me more people. you know, and more people wanted to come work for me because you could just always hear us laughing and having a good time. So the third and final part of the logician is innovative.
Yep.
So what happened was I'm working in Dow Brands and I'm not getting the #1 rating for all the stuff I'm doing. And it got pushed up to my boss's boss's boss. Basically, why isn't this guy getting the #1 rating? And his response is, he's doing all this stuff. I haven't seen any patent applications. Like if he is really being innovative, why don't I see patent applications? So what happens is when you look at a patent, it begins with a patent application. You have to write an application saying, you have to fill out the form. And some patents are built out of a lot of patent applications. Some patents are built out of just one. And he was saying, I haven't seen any. So, you know, that was the wrong thing to do, an administrator teacher, right? A Bond villain. So what I did was I started writing up all the patent applications. And so he had to classify them. So what happens is all the patent applications had to come to him and he had to say the priority, A, B, you know, et cetera. So what happened was Labor Day is a Monday. We have that day off. So I show up Tuesday during lunch and he's got a secretary outside his door. I come in and she goes, do you have an appointment? I go, no, I have a patent application. He goes, send him in. I hand him the patent application. He goes, thank you, John. He writes an A. Wednesday, the next day, I show up at lunch, patent application, come in, he signs off. I go, okay. Thursday, I walk in, patent application. Friday, he goes, just leave it with the secretary. Okay. Monday, he wasn't in. Tuesday, show up patent application. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I showed up with 13 patent applications. Every day he was in, every 13 days in a row at lunch, because that's when he'd be at his desk. It's like, you want patent applications? You're going to get 13 of them and you get them one a day. I could have dropped them off in one day, but no, I'm going to do it every day. And this is the Bond villain. This is like, okay, Mr. Bond, you want to see patent applications? I'll show you patent applications.
Now, did you find that his attitude changed towards you at this point?
He had to laugh. He asked for it. He would go, just leave it. Thank you, John. He'd yell for us. Thank you, John. He just knew it was going to happen every single day. You asked for it, you got it. Now, what ended up happening, and this can be later in my story, is I end up winning with Dale the Inventor of the Year Award at Dow Chemical. And so it all led to being obviously very innovative. But one of the issues is that I came up with this way of doing this percent clean. I basically said, let's get this color, it's called a colorimeter, and we would take a picture. We'd basically shoot a light at the stain and it would categorize the color on 3 axes. Basically 2 of the axes were the color and then the third axis was how light or dark it was. Then I would do a clear stain. So I thought of it as dark was this point in 3 dimensions, light was this point. I know the equation for distance on a line, so I could measure every swatch and I could find the distance. Now remember, at Procter & Gamble, they would have people look at it and rate the swatches. I was getting these numbers down. And now all of a sudden my model was tightening up, and we're going to talk more about modeling later. But so now I had this way of being really, really specific and objective with exactly how clean this swatch was, which is the thing I'm measuring. So now I could model exactly. And the big thing that happened, the most innovative thing that happened is all of surfactant, all the experts in surfactants measure everything or categorize it by HLB, hydrophilic lipophilic balance, meaning you have a surfactant, how water loving versus how oil loving. It's the balance. It would be like saying how light or dark is your skin.
Yeah.
That's literally what they're doing. And the thing is there's all these other measures. Some surfactants, you know, have these phenol groups, these like benzene groups. Some of them don't. So that, even though they're both a certain oil, that changes it. And what happens is everybody uses this term cloud point.
Yeah.
So what they would look at is they would look at the cloud point. Like what temperature does this surfactant fall out of water? And that again is it's literally a racist or an analytical measure. It's not unique to the surfactant at all. I was developing this measure for surfactants that took into account all of the uniqueness. It's almost like 49 uniquenesses.
Yeah.
And so now what happened was I had this model where I could see if a surfactant was going to work with something else or not, because it's got to like it enough to go into the soil, and it's got to like it not enough to let go. I essentially had come up with this measure for surfactants that no one else in the world had. And I understood surfactants better than everybody else in the world because I was working with something that was infinitely soluble in oil, soluble in water, and I had a measure. This was truly innovative. And I used to read all these papers and just go, these papers on surfactants are racist.
Yeah.
They have one spectrum, whether it's cloud point or HLB, and that's it. And it's like, that's why they can't get the results I'm getting. That's why they can't go into the territory I was going into.
Yep. So obviously we've spoken about this going right back through our 100 videos almost. And, you know, I mean, one of the first videos we did was talking about racism and how people, you know, they look straight to it. That's what they call it. That's how they do it. And this is how it's never dissolved. Now you're talking about dissolving water and oil. And so it just, everything goes back. So it's like, the model of all models, just is life. It's literally life. So what you learned through chemicals, you can put into daily practice with people.
Right. So what happened was, like I said, we're going to learn that I win the Inventor of the Year award about 4 months after I left. But I realized I was bored with an intelligent customer. This was easy. I was sitting there going, this is the easiest thing in the world, is to generate a graph and prove this is a fact. Remember how I got frustrated at those unintelligent customers at Dow or at Procter & Gamble?
Yeah.
I think I'd like to take another shot at understanding people. I think I'd like to go figure out what's going on with people, because I can objectively control reality.
Yep.
There's a disconnect in the person's brain between reality and what they're saying. Now that I have a measure for reality and I can control it, I want to go back. And I got a phone call from a person that said, and the phone call started off this way: did you formulate liquid tide? Were you one of the people that formulated liquid tide? I'm like, yes. Because at that time, there had only been 3. And I'm the only one who was outside the company. And that was the high standard of formulation. He's like, I have a job opportunity for you. This company is looking for someone like you, exact like you. They want you to come out. They want you to handle all this. Now, I had been at Dow 4 years. This company's going to compete with Procter & Gamble. I had a 2-year non-compete. So now I was going to go to a company and get to compete with my first company head to head and see if I could take it right out of their skin.
Yeah.
So basically what happened was I learned information about surfactants, the engine for all this cleaning that's beyond anything anybody had learned. And now I was ready to go into the smaller company and use that with my designed experiment way and my project management to go take on Big Brother.
So do you feel that this was all taking you so that you could then work on your own and start it from start to finish? So now, as much as you were still learning, so you were intern and then you moved up to kind of college, you went through the 2 jobs. Now it's only John. Now it's only Johnny Reb in his own. Johnny Reb's back. He's going against Procter & Gamble. That's a very rebellious move. It's going against your main kind of teacher as such.
Right. So if an administrator teacher went to a consumer product company with the goal of going after his former company, do you think he'd be INTP or INTJ?
No, he would have to change again.
Well, stay tuned.
Nice. I'm looking forward to this. So obviously we have spoken about personality tests to people before, and what you're doing here is proving how quickly or how easy they can change depending on the position that you're in. So it's almost like labeling oneself will then affect everything that they do.
The personality tests look at behavior, and they look at the context, and they are valuable for seeing the behavior in a context. The danger is when a person believes they are their behavior, they lose their free will.
Yep.
And that's what I'm about. It's great to do the personality test, but I want to help you find out who you really are so you get your free will, and then you're able to express yourself in any context and have energy. I was always an administrator teacher in all these companies, but the context caused me to behave a certain way, which they measured. And that's great. And Myers-Briggs accurately measured my behavior.
Yep.
It never measured who I was.
No, I love that. And this is where the mind-blowing, information that you've got, and this is why we're doing these stories, why we've done all the information that we've done, is so that people understand, and it's all free. It's all free. It's amazing. So thank you. I look forward to our next one now, because I want to find out where you were, and then we can measure them all up. So thank you very much, John. Enjoy your night. Take it easy.
Bye.